So I wanted to go through this little write-up that I made about some of the numbers and inconsistencies in the 2020 election. And here I wrote, as has been stated by President Trump and several right-leaning news sites such as the Epoch Times, One American News Network, and the Washington Times, despite the dismissal of such claims by left-leaning news sites such as the New York Times, NPR, and USA Today, there's evidence that election fraud occurred in the 2020 election. And I pulled this chart off of a statistics website, which sourced the U.S. Census Bureau. And between 2018 and 2020, in 2018, there were 153 million registered voters. And in 2020, there were 168 million registered voters. So that meant within 2 years, the U.S. government estimated that an additional 4 million people became of voting age. And so it's estimated that a total of 157 million registered voters in 2020. Okay, so and so the published numbers in the 2020 election, and this will differ depending on which source you look at, but I looked at this one website in particular that I'm going to reference at the bottom of the page, and then I also looked at The Guardian. So it says that President Trump lost because he only got 74 million votes, 74.2 million votes, whereas Joe Biden won by 81 million votes. And together, combined, that the numbers add up to 155.5 million votes between both President Trump and Joe Biden. So, comparing the numbers between the estimated total number of voters in the 2020 election versus the published numbers is going to be 157. So the registered the number of registered voters is 157.1 million versus the number of people that actually turned out for the election were 155.5 million. So there's a difference of about 1.5 million votes. So if you do some quick mental math, that means that the published numbers, the number of published registered voters that came out to vote versus the total number of possible votes, there's a difference of 50 million, and the published number exceeds the total number of possible votes. So that was one thing that stood out. And then another thing is we remember that President Obama won by 69 million votes in 2008. President Trump won by 75 million votes. And then, surprisingly, Joe Biden won by 81 million votes, in which was interesting because, he had less turnout than both President Obama and President Trump in either in his rallies and any of his events, as you probably have seen in the mainstream media. Not a lot of turnout to his rallies. So, and then here are two charts. This one, the one on the left is from Wisconsin, and the one on the right is Michigan. And so red is the Republican votes and blue is the Democratic votes. And if I zoom in to both of these graphs, you'll see that both of them have vertical lines on the blue graph, or the blue line. And so I think in terms of data collection and interpretation, and when you read graphs in math and statistics. Vertical lines, they usually mean that for a single x coordinate, which is the horizontal axis, right? For a single x coordinate, you have multiple y coordinates, which is the vertical line, and there's it usually means that the data is being made up or just created out of thin air. So it doesn't look it doesn't look very convincing. So anyway, those were just some of the things that stood out about the election that I wanted to point out and to put in this little write up. So it's a little bit shorter than a report, but it's something that I wanted to address, since I did talk about in the previous video about how there were some inconsistencies in the election. So anyway, thanks for tuning in.